They said the Langford house cried when it rained. Old men with milky eyes swore they'd seen tears slip down its wooden frame, as if the shutter swept for something lost. Children walking past on their way to Sunday school were told to keep tire, eyes low and feet quick, and those who lingered near the rusted gate, teenagers bold with curiosity or boys drunk on dares, came back with whispers they couldn't explain. A window slamming shut with no wind, the scent of lilies with no garden, the feeling of someone watching them, not from behind but beneath. To the world outside, it was just another Victorian estate tucked into Boston's oldest quarter, Wisteria, choking its railings, ivy sinking its teeth into the brick, the paint long peeled by New England winters. But to the ones who really remembered, it was a tomb sealed in timbers and gilt. The Langford house had devoured two daughters in 1873 and hadn't spoken since. But the house is still remembered, and so did one man. His name was Elias Finch, once a bright-eyed clerk at the Beacon Street Records office. Elias had retired early, no nearing 60. He spent his days cataloging obscure disappearances and reconstructing case files no one had asked for, not officially. Some believed he had gone mad after his wife's death. Others believed he'd gone mad far earlier. What they didn't know was that Elias had been there the night the Langford sisters vanished. He hadn't spoken of it in decades, not to his wife, not to the priests who tried to save her from the bottle, not to the physician who watched her waste away. But when the house began weeping again, loudly, violently, as if sobbing through its foundations, he couldn't stay silent. It began with a letter, an envelope sealed in wax, delivered not by post, but left on his doorstep in the early dawn. There was no name, only the scent of old wood and crushed lilies. Inside, a single line: you were there. You saw her open the door. No return address, no signature. But the weight of that sentence was heavier than truth. Elias stared at it for hours. Then he packed a coat, his old journal, and a tin of matches, and he returned. The Langford estate sat crooked on its hill, as though the ground itself had tried to spit it out. The front gate squealed open with no resistance, and the air inside smelled of moss and old blood. No one had lived there since 1873. No one legally, at least. Elias stood in the doorway, eyes closed, breathing the house in. He whispered, "I'm sorry," though no one had asked. The door opened before he touched it. Inside, time had rotted everything except the memory. The portraits were gone, frames still ghosting their outlines on the walls. The chandelier hung limp, its candles melted into the floor like waxen limbs. The grand piano in the parlor had snapped its own strings, as though it too called no longer bare to play. But it was the smell that struck him, the overwhelming scent of lilies, not fresh, but dying, sweet, turning sour. He followed it, down the hallway, past the study, past the room where Margaret Langford used to read poetry aloud by firelight, past the hallway mirror that had once reflected something that wasn't standing there. And then, the water, a faint trail, like tears on a dusty cheek, led down the narrow steps to the cellar. He hadn't been down there since that night. Back then, Elias was just a young man in love. The Langfords had hired him as a tutor for their youngest daughter, Evangeline, 16, clever and already burdened by a sadness no child should carry. Her sister, Isabel, was older, quieter, and prone to long silences, staring out the window, as if trying to remember a life before this one. Their mother had died in childbirth. Their father had died at war. The estate was run by a sternout who feared God and mirrors equally. But Elias had grown close to Evangeline. He had shared books with her, secrets, and one summer night, while the world outside sang with crickets, he had kissed her fingers beneath Fellilac tree and promised that one day they would leave. But something in that house wouldn't let her go. That night, April 17, 1873, he had stayed late, reading in the parlor while the sisters played piano upstairs. Then silence. Not a scream, not a cry, just absence. He had called for them, once, twice, a third time. He had followed the scent of lilies down to the cellar. There, the old door had creaked open and water had seeped from the stone walls. He remembered the candle, flickering, the way it hissed in his hand. And then Isabel. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot, soaked, her hair clinging to her cheeks. She had looked up at him with wide eyes and whispered. It opened, and when he tried to descend, the candle went out. By the time he returned with help, the sisters were gone. No trace, no blood, nobody. Only the lilies and the water and the cellar that had dried by morning. Now, 52 years later, the water had returned. Elias descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the wood echoing like a scream in his bones. At the bottom, the stone floor was damp, and the walls glistened with something like sweat. The air was thick, heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The old wooden door, the one that had never led anywhere, stood ajar. Beyond it was something new. A passage, narrow, winding, lined with roots that pulsed faintly, like veins. The smell of lilies was overwhelming now, cloying, suffocating. Elias stepped inside. He walked for what felt like hours. The passage widened. The air grew warmer. He hard ripping, whispering. Then dashed the room. It was round, carved from earth and stone, and in the center stood a shallow pool of water, black as ink, still as death. And beside it Dasher. Evangeline. Unaged. Unchanged, as if 1873 had never ended. She turned slowly. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale. But she smiled, a smile that remembered him. Elias, she said, and her voice was both water and wind. He fell to his knees. How? He asked. She looked at the pool. It wanted us. It fed on our grief, our guilt. We opened it without knowing. We sang, and it answered. He crawled forward. Are you real? She touched his face. Her fingers were cold, as real as the house above, as real as the silence that followed. He wept. I should have saved you. You tried, she whispered, but some doors don't open. They swallow. And then she stepped back into the pool and vanished. The water rippled. The lilies bloomed and then withered. The stone room groaned. And Elias heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Isabel. But not as he remembered. Older, eyes sunken, skin gray, like a corpse kept awake by sorrow. You brought him, she rasped. I didn't know. He saw, she said, pointing at him. He saw her open the door and did nothing. He backed away. I tried. You forgot, she hissed. But the house didn't. The house remembers what we bury. The walls shook. The water boiled. And Elias understood. It wasn't the cellar that took them. It was grief. It was silence. It was the guilt that had festered for 50 years, fed by a house built in secrets. The house was not haunted. It was haunting itself. And Elias, he had been the one who left, the one who buried the truth beneath forgetfulness. He ran, back through the passage, up the stairs, out into the rain. The house cried with him, and behind him, the door slammed shut. Forever. He returned to the city with nothing, no proof, no story the newspapers would believe. But he left behind his journal. And in it, one final entry. The house remembers what we choose to forget. And sometimes, silence screams louder than truth. It was found weeks later, beside his body. The cause of death, drowning. In a dry room, with the scent of lilies still clinging to the walls. And so I ask you, when a house forgets, we call it old. When a man forgets, we call it mercy. But when the earth remembers, what do we call that? The Langford estate, once the proud cornerstone of Whitmore Hill, stood like a mausoleum above Boston's fog-lined edge, its gables sharp as teeth, its windows black as unblinking eyes. Locals said the house had a memory, that it held on to grief like old wallpaper and wept it through the walls when the wind shifted west. But no one dared say this aloud, not to the Langfords, not in 1873, and certainly not to Eleanor. Eleanor Langford returned in the spring, wearing mourning black, not for a death, but for the time that had died in her absence. 4 years abroad in France had changed her, hardened her posture, softened her voice. There was a quiet elegance to her now, the kind of poise that speaks more in silences than in speech. Her letters home had dwindled, but the guilt had not, and so she came back. Home. The gravel crackled under the wheels of her carriage. The ivy had grown thicker since she'd last seen it, swallowing the iron fence and clawing up the sides of the house like fingers reaching for the roof. The front steps were damp, always damp, as if the stone sweated in the cool air. And when she stepped through the front door, the scent hit her. Lilies. Not fresh, not cut, but decaying, fermenting. Her father stood in the foyer, older than she remembered. His beard was grayer, his eyes thinner. Henry Langford had once commanded entire crews across the Atlantic. Now he struggled to hold a teacup steady. He embraced her, stiff and cold. The fireplace behind him was lit, but the heat never reached her. "Skin, you've come home," he said. "I had to," she replied. "It's been too long." Henry nodded toward the staircase. "They're waiting." Clara and Margaret, twins, 17 now, had always shared a bond beyond understanding. Even as girls, they spoke in half-sentences, finished each other's thoughts, and knew each other's fears without words. But Eleanor had not expected this. They sat together at the window seat in the drawing room, holding hands, staring out at Thegardon like sentinels. Their hair was longer, their skin pale. They turned in unison when Alina entered, their faces lighting up in a way that made her chest ache. "Ellie," Clara whispered. "We missed you," said Margaret. They hugged her. Their bones felt sharper. Their clothes smelled faintly of wet stone. Eleanor noticed bruises around Margaret's wrists. Not fresh, faint and round, like something had gripped her in sleep. She asked nothing. Not yet. That night, over dinner, the silence lingered like fog. Henry barely spoke. The twins picked at their food and exchanged glances that made Eleanor feel like an intruder in her own home. When she asked what they'd been doing lately, any hobbies, interests, music, Clara replied, "We've been digging." Margaret nodded. "We buried something important." "Where?" "In the orchard," Clara said softly. "Under the tree with the split trunk." Henry's hand shook, and his glass tipped, spilling wine that looked too much like blood across the tablecloth. No one moved to clean it. In the days that followed, Eleanor tried to settle in. She unpacked her books, set up her writing desk in the old library, and tried to make the home feel like hers again. But the house had changed, or perhaps it had always been this way, and time had only stripped away the illusion of safety. The corridors were too quiet. The walls whispered late at night, not words, but movement, soft and sloshing, like water shifting through pipes that did not exist. Wet footprints appeared on the wooden floors at dawn. Puddled outside her door, the maids muttered prayers under their breath and refused to enter the basement. One of them, a girl named Anya, claimed there was a door at the bottom of the cellar steps that no one could open or remember building. "But it's there," she insisted, eyes wide. "It wasn't before." When Eleanor investigated, she found it, an iron door, embedded in the stone. No handle, no hinges, no keyhole. Just there. She asked her father about it. "There's no such door," Henry said. "Don't speak of things that aren't." That night, the lilies bloomed outside her window, though no one had planted them. She began journaling again, something she hadn't done since her second year in Paris. The act felt grounding, like pinning shadows to a page before they could shift. April 4th. The house is colder than it should be. Even the sunlight feels gray here. April 6th. Clara woke up soaked again. She claims not to know how. Margaret says the dreams have returned of the well and the voices beneath it. April 8th. The footprints are getting larger, as if something else now walks alongside them. April 9th. I saw the garden spade hidden beneath Margaret's bed. Dirt under her fingernails, even at breakfast. April 10th. Clara said something strange today. She looked at the cracked mirror in the hallway and whispered, "She's almost through." Eleanor didn't sleep that night. The garden became their sanctuary and their secret. Clara and Margaret spent hours digging behind the orchard. Eleanor followed once, unseen, and watched them lower something wrapped in cloth into the earth, a doll. She thought at first, then she saw the glint of teeth when confronted. Clara only smiled. Some things need to be returned to the soil. The next morning, Eleanor dug it up. It was not a doll. It was a bird. Mouth sewn shut with black thread, eyes gouged out. Its feet had been tied with a fishing line, knotted in a pattern she didn't recognize. She burned it. That night, the house howled. Wind slammed against the windows, though the air was still. The temperature dropped. The mirror in the hallway cracked entirely down the center. And in her dreams, Eleanor stood in the basement, facing the iron door. From behind it came a voice, not pleading, but inviting. "You've returned, all of you." She awoke with her gown soaked, her feet covered in mud. Henry grew more withdrawn. Eleanor found him wandering the halls at dawn, whispering to himself, in maritime prayers long abandoned by the church, "I thought the sea had swallowed it." He muttered one morning, "But it followed me home." "What did?" she asked. He blinked at her, confused. "Who are you?" Later, in the study, she found his maps, dozens of them, marked not with trade routes, but circles, red circles in the middle of the Atlantic. One bore a strange note in his handwriting. They said it was an island, but it moved. Eleanor stared at it for a long time. She thought of the girls, of their strange speech, their soaking clothes, their silence. She thought of the well behind, the orchard, long sealed, and of the way the wind moved around it, not over, but away. As if the air itself knew better, she flipped to the back of her journal. One final entry before everything broke. April 16th. Whatever they found in the well, it has not let go of them. The next morning, the servants quit, all of them. They left behind their keys and their crosses and their warnings, locked the basement. One whispered, eyes rimmed red, "And do not answer if it knocks." Eleanor packed a bag. She intended to take the girls away, by force if she had to. But when she went to their room, the beds were empty. A trail of wet footprints led to the cellar, and the iron door open. A week later, the Langford sisters were gone. No one heard them leave. No horses taken. No locks broken. Only the water remained. Only the lilies. And the sound of sobbing from the cellar whenever it rained. Years would pass. Rain would warp the wood, and ivy would claim the roof. Henry Langford would die with his eyes open and his lungs full of water. And Eleanor? She would never leave Whitmore Hill again. Not in body, not in spirit. The townsfolk say she still walks the halls, reading her journal aloud in the dark. Some say the twins answer her, though not with words, just footsteps, just echoes, just the sound of dripping water when the pipes are dry. The garden had once been their sanctuary, long ago. Before Paris, before death, before grief hollowed the Langford name. It had been a place of laughter and summer dresses. The sisters used to weave between hedgerows with dirt in their knees and songs on their lips. Eleanor remembered those days faintly, like a dream half kept in the mind's corner, back when their mother still walked among them, humming lullabies that bloomed with the roses. But now the garden was dying, not all at once. That would have been merciful. Instead, it withered in slow defiance of nature. The lilacs blackened at the buds. The foxglove twisted toward the ground. The trees bore fruit far too early, apples in April, pears before their time, each one bruised and rotting on the branch before it ever fell. The birds stopped coming. No sparrows at the windows, no finches in the hedges. Even the crows that once lingered by the gate had vanished, as if repelled not by fear, but by understanding. Something had changed. Something had awakened. Eleanor began to notice Clara drifting toward the far edge of the estate each morning, never with purpose, always as though pulled by something unseen. The direction was the same each time, past the garden, beyond the orchard, to the forgotten well. It had been sealed for decades, a stone lip overgrown with vines, and a rusted grate bolted down during Eleanor's childhood. After the incident with the neighbor's boy, he'd fallen in chasing a cat, but when they pulled him out, he'd refused to speak. His hands were raw, his eyes closed. No one used the well again, but Clara stood beside it now, fingers brushing the rusted grate like one might touch a sleeping animal. Sometimes she hummed, sometimes she just stared. When Eleanor asked her why, Clara only smiled. "It hums back," she said. Eleanor didn't hear it at first. But Margaret did. "It only sings to her," she told Eleanor, wringing her hands, her eyes darting toward the orchard. "It never calls me." The tone in her voice wasn't jealousy, it was dread. That night, Eleanor sat awake by the window, watching the garden. The moon glinted off the wet grass. A shadow moved near the hedgerow, small, quick, then gone. She told herself it was unanimal, a deer, a trick of the eye. But deep down, something in her remembered a melody, a lullaby her mother used to hum, though she'd never heard the words. And when the wind shifted through the orchard, Eleanor thought she heard the same tune rising from beneath the ground. The well wasn't dry. Not anymore. Margaret came to her 2 days later, pale, trembling, eyes rimmed red from weeping. "We didn't mean to," she whispered. Eleanor held her shoulders. "Mean to what? We just wanted to hear from her again. We missed her." "Who, Mother?" Eleanor stiffened. "It was the governess," Margaret continued, breath ragged. "Miss Whitlock. She said there were ways to speak to the dead, that blood remembers." Eleanor remembered Miss Whitlock stern, strange, always watching them when she thought no one noticed. She had vanished after their mother's death, dismissed in haste. Rumors had followed, books in Latin, markings beneath her bed, birds found nailed to tree trunks. Eleanor had buried those memories. "Clara found her books in the attic," Margaret said. "She said we could do it, that we could reach her, so we tried." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "When?" "Months ago, in the garden, by the well." The air in the room thickened. Margaret looked up at her. "I think something answered." Eleanor said nothing for a long time. She simply walked to her writing desk and opened her journal. On the next blank page, she wrote, "The garden dies and the well hums. Clara walks as if led. Margaret weeps for sins she can't name." What kind of mother answers through water? Henry worsened. He no longer spoke at dinner, only stared at the window behind Eleanor as if expecting it to crack open. Once, he asked the butler to lock every door in the house, then demanded the windows be bricked up. "They watch from the orchard," he muttered. "They know what the girls did." When Eleanor asked who they were, he could not answer, or would not. Later, she found him in the drawing room, trembling. "The sea is in the walls," he whispered. She dismissed it as madness, until the dog drowned. It was found one gray morning in the hearth, lying curled like it had gone to sleep but soaked, waterlogged, bloated, no burns, no injuries, just drowned. Inside the fireplace, the room was dry, no rain, no broken pipes, only the scent of brine and lilies. The servants fled. Eleanor buried the dog beneath the orchard. Clara watched from the well. Margaret did not come outside. No one said a word during the burial, but something knocked from beneath the soil. That evening, Eleanor returned to her mother's vanity in the east wing. It had remained untouched since the funeral, still lined with hairbrushes, perfume vials, and silk gloves left as if she'd only stepped out for a moment. The mirror was cloudy with time, drawers stuck from disuse, but Eleanor forced them open, and beneath the yellowed handkerchiefs and dried flower petals, she found a letter, folded once, sealed with a pressed daisy. The paper was warped, the ink smeared, but one line remained: "Don't let the girls near the water." Eleanor did not sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the orchard sway in the moonlight. Somewhere in the dark, the well was humming, and inside the house, the water was moving, not dripping, crawling. A child's game, they'd called it, sink or summon. Words whispered over water at midnight, names offered like seeds dropped into a dark soil. A bowel, a candle, a name spoken 3 times. It had been passed through the nursery like a lullaby, harmless, unexamined, until it wasn't. Eleanor had never believed in games like that, nor had she believed in hauntings or spirits, not even after their mother's drowning, not even after the garden died. Her grief had always been pragmatic, quiet, logical, stitched into routine and ritual, but now the stitches were coming loose, and the truth was no longer content to whisper. It wanted to be found. It began with a name, Miss Albrecht. Not Whitlock, not the governess Eleanor remembered from their childhood years, but the one who came after, a pale, spectral woman with ash-colored hair and the voice of a hymn sung off-key. She arrived in 1870, dismissed without explanation in 1872, vanished since. Eleanor found her name scrawled in a servant's Bible left behind in the attic. Next to it, a single line: "She taught the girls something that made the mirrors weep." After 3 days of searching, Eleanor found her. Not in a town, in a convent. St. Meryl's cloister sat atop a fog-wrapped hill an hour south of Boston. The nuns there were silent. They accepted Eleanor without questions, but watched her with eyes that had forgotten warmth. Miss Albrecht, now Sister Daria, had not spoken in over 2 years. She did not pray. She did not write letters. She sat in the chapel from sunrise to dusk, unmoving, fingers always twitching as if trying to hold something no longer there. When Eleanor spoke the names, Clara, Margaret, Sister Daria flinched so violently, shuffled from her bench. Her mouth opened wide, but no scream. Came only a breath, sharp hissing, like steam escaping a kettle. Then she began to convulse. They rushed her to the infirmary. A nun tried to calm her with scripture. Another whispered that'd seen this before once. When a traveler spoke of wells, but Eleanor could only stare at the paper Sister Daria had clawed from her pocket, now clutched in a bloodied fist. A single symbol scratched over and over, and Ouroboros the snake devouring itself, but coiled around an eye. A woman's eye. Weeping. When Eleanor tried to take it, Sister Daria lunged. Her lips moved then. Finally. Just one word. Under. Later, a former maid Bridget, now married and living near the wharf, met Eleanor in secret. She had worked the estate during Albrecht's final year. Her hands shook as she lit her pipe. She wasn't a governess, Bridget said. Not really. More like a keeper or a messenger. Of what? She said children could hear better, that they were closer to the other side. What other side? Bridget stared out toward the sea. She played games with them. Sink or summon, they called it. Just a game at first. Names in water, reflections in bowls. But after the storm. What storm? July 1871. Lightning hit the orchard. The sky opened for hours. That night, the twins disappeared. Eleanor felt her throat close. They found them hours later, soaked to the bone, curled inside the well. Eyes open, but wrong, like they were looking at something no one else could see. And Albrecht, fired the next day, left before morning, said she'd made a mistake, said the girls had answered someone who shouldn't have been listening. Eleanor returned home with wind in her ears and bile in her throat. The estate loomed in Thetisk like it had grown since morning, its windows darker, its chimneys smoking though no fire had been lit. Inside, the silence was waiting. The parlor piano let out a single note as she entered. No one near it. The wallpaper in the eastern hall had peeled in a perfect spiral, and in the garden, every tree had turned toward the well. Clara was sleepwalking now. Eleanor followed her one night in secret. She moved like a doll being carried, eyes wide, lips lightly parted, gown soaked from the waist down. Her bare feet left prints along the hall wherrings, but she always stopped at the same place. The locked cellar door. She would place her hand upon it, tilt her head as if listening, and then whisper something. Eleanor could never hear what. She was too afraid to get closer. Once, she thought Clara whispered, "She's almost through." Margaret was different. She no longer cried, no longer met Eleanor's gaze. Her days were spent writing on the backs, often book pages, scraps of linen, the inside of wardrobe doors, but not in English, not in Latin. It was a language no one recognized. The script curled like vines, looped and barbed. Half-runes, half-sized. Eleanor brought a page to the priest in town. He refused to touch it, said it burned. And Henry was not Henry anymore. He now moved only in bursts, sealing windows with wooden planks, nailing bedroom doorshut while muttering prayers in broken sailor's Latin. He smelled of oil and salt. The look in Heist's eyes was the look of a man watching a wave taller than the mast, knowing it would break. Eleanor found him crouched in the attic one morning, holding his old compass. "She's everywhere," he whispered. "Every room, every mirror." His hands trembled. "I thought I buried her at sea." That night, Eleanor's candle flickered in its holder despite the windows being sealed. She lay in bed, eyes burning, unable to shake the sense that something beneath her was shifting, like the house was breathing through the soil. As she turned back the covers, she felt something brush against her fingertips, a crackle of damp paper. Beneath her pillow, a note, soft as skin, edges soaked, ink bleeding. One line remained, "You're too late." They're already speaking with her. The room spun. She opened her journal. "I tried to write." The pen snapped. In her hand. Water began dripping from the ceiling, not from the corners, not from cracks, from the center, a perfect line. One drop, then another dot, and from the hallway came the sound of a girl humming. Low, slow. A song with no words, a lullaby no one remembered teaching. The cellar wept. At first, it was only dampness, condensation clinging to stone, small puddles that came and went. But soon the water rose in earnest. Inch by inch, it filled the cellar floor with clear, soundless water. No rainfall could explain it. No pipe was broken. The housekeeper insisted the water level rose even when the doors were locked, and no one had entered. They drained it, twice, and each time, by morning, the water returned glassy, motionless, as if laid by an unseen hand. By the third day, it wasn't just water. Dead insects floated on the surface: beetles, silverfish, wasps with wings folded like prayer. They were always arranged in small circles, never scattered, as if something beneath had placed them with intent. And it was cold, bone deep, like harbor ice. The servants began to dream of drowning. At first, they dismissed it, but when more than one maid awoke choking, soaked to the waist, and gasping for breath though their beds were dry, panic followed. They claimed they heard whispers in the walls, that the mirrors pulsed with water from the inside, that the cellar smelled like salt and roses. One by one, they left. Those who stayed lasted no more than a night. The butler, Thomas, loyal to the Langfords since the war, resigned after waking with blood in his mouth and the taste of brine on his tongue. He left without collecting wages, and then the house was quiet. To quiet, a silence not of peace, but of anticipation. Eleanor turned to what record she could trust, the past. She tore open the family safe, rifled through receipts, correspondence, land grants, but a waste box at the very back hidden beneath a false panel that held the truth. Her mother's death certificate had always claimed drowning, a storm, a fall from the harbor dock during an evening walk, but the coroner's notes were incomplete, redacted in places, names blurred, witness signatures missing, and then buried in the back one surviving medical report from a private physician, hired quietly by Henry Langford. It mentioned trauma inconsistent with open water drowning, mud beneath fingernails, rope burns on the ankles, waterlogged lungs but no trace of saltwater. A handwritten margin note chilled her, soil present in mouth and sinuses, pulled under in a shallow basin. The harbor hadn't taken her mother, the well had, and her body was never recovered. Eleanor sat at her mother's old vanity for hours. She thought of the warnings. Don't let the girls near the water. They're already speaking with her. Something old had been covered up. Not only grief but a story. A drowning disguised as an accident. A burial disguised as disappearance. The house had carried this lie for over a decade, but now it was leaking out through the walls, through her sisters, through water distilled to be natural. The well had taken their mother, but it had never released her. Clara changed. The innocence in her face curdled into something knowing. She wandered the halls barefoot, speaking softly as if to someone beside her. Eleanor once got her in the music room, whispering to the air. She says the cold is only bad at first. When Eleanor asked who she meant, Clara's voice dropped into something low, familiar. Nothers. She always hated storms. She said it was their mother's voice, perfectly mimicked, gently nostalgic, the way she used to speak when brushing Margaret's chair. Clara blinked and smiled. She says you don't listen anymore. Margaret retreated entirely. She no longer joined meals, no longer walked the halls. She stayed in the nursery, the room none of them had used in years. When Eleanor entered, she found the wallpaper peeled back, strange symbols drawn in charcoal behind it. Margaret sat beneath the window writing on the floor, her handwriting looping in tight spirals around her feet. She would speak only in riddles now. Eleanor begged her for sense. Margaret looked up once, eyes glassy, and whispered, "When the eye opens beneath the soil, we'll all breathe water like air." Henry lost whatever grip he had on sanity. One night, Eleanor followed the sound of hammering and found him in the eastern hallway, shirtless, eyes wild, blood on his hands. He was carving names into the wooden floorboards with a kitchen knife, names she recognized, and one she did not. Claire Margaret Teleodoris, who was Isolde. Eleanor demanded. Henry only rocked back on his heels, tears running down his beard. She wouldn't stay dead, he muttered. She begged me to bury her at sea, but the girls, they kept her here. Later, Eleanor combed the birth records. There was no Isolde. No fourth child, but when she returned to the nursery, there were 4 handprints and dust on the WINDOWSILL. The cellar water rose higher. Now it has reached the second step. When Eleanor opened the door to inspect it, she heard something below, not movement, not splashing, but breathing. Slow, shuddering, like lungs that hadn't drawn air in years. She began to keep a candle lit at all hours. She nailed shut her window, stuffed towels beneath her door, salted the threshold. It changed nothing. Each night, the house swelled with moisture. Her journal pages curled. Her pillow grew damp. Her dreams grew heavy with mud and dragging weight and voices calling to her. From the bottom of the well, she remembers you. She waits beneath. Bring them back. Eleanor's entries turned frantic. May 3rd. Clara's voice is no longer hers. She stands in corners and mouths words I can't hear. May 4th. Margaret drew a door in ash on the nursery floor. When I stepped over it, I heard something whisper my name. May 6th. Father speaks of the sea again. He says it's inside the house now, that she brought it in. May 7. I heard someone singing in the cellar. It was Mother's lullaby, the one she used when we're sick. She ended the final entry with a question. What if the thing that's speaking to them isn't her? Some truths arrive not with thunder, but with the quiet scratching of history. Binding earth dusty, reluctant, and long ignored. The Langford name had once meant something on Whitmore Hill. Wealth, trade, power. But what is a name, Eleanor would soon wonder, when it is stitched over rot? The answer began with a woman the townsfolk had forgotten, but the ground had not. Isolde Thorne, a name that burned the tongue like smoke when spoken aloud. Mrs. Dobbins lived in a crooked house that tilted into the wind. Her garden was full of herbs Selina didn't recognize. Her eyes were pale and unblinking. She had lived on the edge off Whitmore Hill for 87 years, and she remembered everything the town had tried to bury. The land was never right, she said, setting down a cracked teacup. That's why the orchards are. Why do birds never nest long? That hill wasn't just claimed by the Langfords, it was stained first. By what? Eleanor asked. Not what. Who? She lit a crooked candle and handed Eleanor an oilskin bundle of old parish maps. The Langford estate wasn't the first house to sit on that land. In 1682, there was a scaffold. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she unfolded the parchment. There, marked in faded ink, was the land beside it, Gallows Hill. But the hangings had not always used rope. Some, Mrs. Dobbins whispered, they drowned. Isolde Thorne had been accused of consorting with the devil, of hexing livestock, of walking too often beneath full moons and being too beautiful for her own good. They threw her into the well when she wouldn't confess. It should have ended there. But witnesses claim she didn't sink, that she floated, face up, and sang, My children will sing beneath the ground until they are called again. A curse, a vow, a prophecy, one the land had never forgotten. Eleanor spent 3 nights in the city archives. Dust choked her lungs, candle wax hardened across her fingers, and slowly, a pattern emerged. Every 3rd generation, a family from Whitmore Hill would lose a daughter, sometimes to always young, always around the age of 17. The records never drew the connection, but Eleanor did. The names, the birth dates, the resemblance, the lineage, they all led back to Thorne. Each missing girl had a common ancestor. Each disappearance within walking distance of a certain well. Each face, when compared to old sketches, looked like echoes of one another. And now Clara and Margaret, the twins, were next. The final blow came from a marriage certificate. Eleanor hadn't thought to question it before, but tucked in a tax ledger from 1855 was a line that made her hands go cold. Isolde Marie Thorne Langford, married to Henry Elias Langford. Her mother had changed her name, Thorne, to Langford. To disappear into respectability, to bury her past in silk and silence. She had married into a new name, but the blood had followed. The curse had simply waited. Eleanor returned to the estate at dusk. The sky hung low, gray and sodden. The orchard bent beneath the weight of wind. Clara stood barefoot near the well, humming softly. Margaret was inside, rocking in the nursery, her palms stained with ink that wasn't ink, and Henry was gone. His bedroom door hung open. A wet trail of footprints led from his room down the hallway, then stopped, as if he had been lifted into the air. Eleanor ran to the basement. The cellar was full again, but this time it had overflowed. Water lapped against the threshold, soaking into the floorboards. Climbing the walls, insects floated in thick spirals. Centipedes, hornets, drowned moths pressed together like wreaths. The air smelled of lilies and brine, and from the center of the flooded room, something rose. Not a shape, not a voice, just a sound. Singing. A lullaby with no words, A mother's voice, sweet and slow, echoing up from beneath the floor, calling her children home. Eleanor dropped to her knees, breath broken. They were never safe. Not from the well, not from the truth. Not from Isolde. She looked down at her reflection in the cellar water and saw 4 faces looking back. Clara, Margaret. Isolde. And her own. Their mouths all moved at once. You've heard her too, haven't you? The storm came without warning. No wind, no prelude, just a flash, and then the sky broke open. Rain fell in sheets hard as stones, and the Langford estate, already a house of rot and whisper, began to bleed from its seams. Water poured down the windows, beneath the doors, through the very walls. The orchard trembled. The lilies in the garden wilted and blackened like if they'd been burned. And in the midst of it all, Margaret vanished. Eleanor had been dreaming, though the line between dreams and waking had long blurred. She awoke to thunder that shook the bed frame, and the faint echo of something melodic rising from below. At first, she thought it was the wind, or the rain in the chimney, but then she recognized the voice. Margaret. Singing. A broken version of the lullaby their mother used to hum when they were feverish, now stretched to slow notes decaying on each breath. She ran to Margaret's room. The door was still locked. She had the only key. The windows were sealed with boards their father had nailed in place weeks before. Inside, the bed was soaked. The sheets clung to the mattress like seaweed. And Margaret was gone. No footprints, no broken wood, no signs of struggle, only the cold and the sound of dripping from above, though the ceiling was dry. Clara sat in the hallway, knees drawn to her chest, shaking. She didn't cry, she only whispered. Over and over, she went down singing. She went down singing. She went down singing. Eleanor dropped beside her, grabbed her by the arms. Who took her? But Clara only stared past her, into nothing, and kept whispering. She went down. Like a prayer, or a curse. Henry collapsed that night, in the drawing room, still wearing his boots, his face pale, mouth agape. He was alive, but barely. His lips moved, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Eleanor leaned close. He pressed something into her hand. A matchbook. It bore the symbol Sister Daria had drawn. The arboros wrapped around an eye. The old symbols were everywhere now, behind mirrors, beneath rugs, etched in charcoal beneath wallpaper. Eleanor stood in the middle of the house and felt it, something breathing just beneath the floorboards. The Langford estate had always been a shrine, a mausoleum, and the dead were beginning to gather. That night, Eleanor returned to the cellar. No more waiting. The water had receded slightly, as if giving her permission. The iron door still stood at the far wall, closed, sealed with a chain their father had wrapped tight in a last act of defiance. She took the crowbar and broke it open. The sound it made wasn't metal. It was a shriek, not loud, not human. The door groaned inward, and behind it darkness, and a spiral staircase carved from stone, slick with moss, descending into the earth like a drainpipe for the soul. The walls were wet. The air is warm. The scent of lilies and rot filled her nose, and carved into the stone on either side, women, dozens, hundreds, mouths open wide, eyes hollow, each face is unique. Each one staring into the black. Eleanor descended. The further she went, the narrower the steps became. She counted 63 before losing track. Her candle flickered violently. Her breath fogged in front of her like smoke. Then music. No, not music. Humming. No, not humming. Margaret. Singing from below. The same lullaby, but wrong, bent, slowed. A voice underwater. Eleanor called out. Her voice echoed, then vanished, like it had been swallowed. The air down here was too thick for sound, and on the walls, the carvings began to change. Some had no mouths, others had mouths too wide. Some had hands pressed over their ears, others held children, but each one drowned. Stone tears flowed from their eyes like algae streaks. Their arms twisted skyward, as if reaching for something that would never return. Eleanor began to understand. This wasn't one spirit. Not one voice, not one ghost. The Langford house had never been haunted in the way stories are told. It had been a gathering place, a reliquary, wound in the earth where the silenced were buried and never let go. She reached the bottom of the staircase. The chamber below was vast, rounded like a cistern, but dry. And in the center a pool, still as glass, black as oil. Eleanor stepped toward it. The surface rippled though she hadn't touched it. Margaret's voice rose again, from beneath the water now. She waits. She waits. She waits. Then a whisper behind her, not a voice, a breath. Eleanor. She turned and saw her mother's face. Not whole, not ruined, just waterlogged. Beautiful. Weeping, smiling, and then gone, only the sound of singing beneath the ground. Eleanor dropped to her knees. They had come not for vengeance, but reunion. Every silenced woman, every drowned daughter, every voice is buried by history. All of them, gathering. And Clara was next, unless she found a way to end it. But how do you stop something that's already beneath your skin? Something that shares your blood. Something that calls you by name when you're alone. Something that sings the lullaby your mother used to hum when you were dying of fever. The candle went out. And in the darkness, they sang. The steps never ended. Eleanor's breath came slow now, measured. She had long lost count of how far she descended, how many turns she'd taken. The spiral staircase felt less like stone now and more like a throat tightening as she passed, exhaling a slow, wet heat that carried the scent of lily sand decay. Her lantern flickered. And then, all at once, the staircase ended. She stepped forward, into darkness. And saw it. A chapel, built of the same black stone as the cellar, but older than the house, older than the hill, older perhaps than language. Half submerged in standing water, the pews floated crookedly, some overturned. Their surfaces were strewn with dolls, limbless, eyeless, waterlogged, and teeth. So many teeth, arranged like rosary beads along the floor. The altar stood at the center, above the water line, a crude stone slab veined with green mossand hairline, cracks, and carved deeply across its surface, still sharp after centuries, Isolde Thorne. Eleanor's heart sank. Not just a name, a grave, a throne, a promise. She stepped closer. The water quivered. A sound rose from behind her, humming. Familiar. Off key, like it had been remembered by something that had never learned it properly. She turned and saw Clara, barefoot, eyes wide, soaked in shadow and candlelight. Her nightgown clung to her like seaweed. Her hands moved in slow circles as she approached the altar, still humming the lullaby their mother used to sing. But it wasn't her voice. It was older. Deeper. Hungrier. Eleanor stepped forward. Clara didn't blink. She said, "This is the only way," Clara whispered. Her pupils had all but vanished. Her skin shimmered like it was slicked with oil. "If I go to her, she'll bring Margaret back." "No," she promised. "Clara, listen to me. She's our mother too, in the old way, in the blood way. Clara, please." But Clara was already climbing the altar. Her feet splashed through the shallow water as if it wasn't cold, wasn't real. Her voice never trembled. She stopped only once to smile. "You'll see, you'll understand." Then she stepped into the flooded basin behind the altar and let herself fall. The water didn't splash. It took her, like a breath, like a hand closing around her ankle. She vanished beneath the surface. Gone. Silence followed, until Eleanor screamed, and then dived in. The water wrapped around her like a mouth. She fell deeper than the pool should allow, deeper than stone, deeper than memory, deeper than death. Down and down and down, until the world cracked, and then everything changed. She was no longer swimming. She was standing. The air was still. Water, and yet she breathed. Her hair floated behind her like smoke. Her limbs moved without resistance. Light came from nowhere. Shadows bloomed and retreated like tides. The world beneath the estate was a dream. An aquifer of memory, of repetition, of souls caught in the churn. She saw Clara, but not the Clara she knew. A younger Clara, just a child, playing near the garden well, tossing petals into the dark and singeing nonsense to herself. Then Margaret, 6 or 7, reading aloud to dolls beneath the apple tree. Then dash herself. Over and over. The same scenes, the same words. Looping. Stuck, as if time itself had become infected, snared in a net cast centuries ago. They lived the same hours again and again, never aging, never leaving, and every time, just before dusk, they each turned their heads toward the well, like hearing a mother call them home. Eleanor floated between these memories, untethered. She screamed at them. They didn't hear her. She reached for Margaret, Her fingers passed through. She whispered to Clara. She only giggled and skipped away. Then the light shifted, the ground trembled, and the memory water parted like a veil. Something stood beyond the false reflections, waiting, watching. Isolde. She was tall, drowned. Her body was not rotten, but transformed skin, the color of moonlit stone, her eyes pure white, her dress woven from reeds and human hair. Her mouth was sealed shut with thread, but Eleanor could feel her. Like heat from a fire, like the pressure of the sea in her lungs. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence carried a question. Why have you come? Eleanor stepped forward. You're the reason they're gone. A pause. Isolde tilted her head slightly. No, came the answer, not aloud, but through the bones. I want them back. You were never meant to leave the cycle, the voice inside her said. You were meant to sing and forget, and return. Eleanor stood tall. Then I will remember, and I will break it. Isolde's mouth opened, the threads snapping one by one, letting out a gasp of wind and voice and salt water and screams all at once. And Eleanor saw. She saw the night Isolde was drowned. She saw the women who followed, dragged to the well, to the gallows, to the fire. She saw how the curse was not vengeance, but memory, a blood-bound echo to ensure Noon forgot what had been done in silence. And she saw that the well was not a prison. It was a womb. And each girl taken was not destroyed but reabsorbed. To be reborn. To sing the lullaby again, unless someone chose to stay. To anchor the echo, to rewrite the final note. Eleanor turned toward the chapel above, saw her sisters hovering just beyond, glass-eyed, trapped in the loops. She looked at Isolde. Then at her own reflection, now split into pieces, child, woman, daughter, heir. And she said one word, enough. Then she stepped forward and embraced Isolde. And everything went dark. There is sorrow older than stone, older than language, older than blood. It lives in places forgotten by sunlight, beneath root, beneath water, beneath the spaces in time where grief becomes scripture. Eleanor stood in such a place now, a breathless, buried dream. And in the center of it, the ghost of Isolde Thorne waited. She was not beautiful. She was not monstrous. She was simply tired. Her hair floated in slow ribbons around her face. Her skin shimmered like the underside of a fish, wet, pale, cracked with time. Her eyes, pure white, looked through Eleanor, not at her. And yet, she spoke without moving her mouth. Her voice writhed like water rushing between the ribs, a pressure, a memory. I thought you would not come. Eleanor stepped forward, trembling. I had no choice. Isolde tilted her head. None of us ever did. They stood in silence for what could have been seconds or centuries. Then Eleanor whispered, You took them. Isolde turned, slowly, round them. The drowned chapel began to fade, revealing something beneath even this sacred place, a void. An ocean without waves, stretching endlessly into black. And rising from its depths, something asleep. Breathing. Slow. Massive. The ground pulsed. No, Isolde finally said. I hid them. Eleanor's mouth parted, but she said nothing. Isolde floated now above the water, her body turning ever so slightly as though orbiting a current. Only she could feel. There is something deeper than curses, deeper than me, older than the well, older than Whitmore Hill, older than your name or mine. The air chilled. The water stilled. Isolde extended a single finger and the veil lifted. Eleanor saw it. The deep mother. She was not a creature. Not fully, not even a god, but a will, old and drowning, a mother of ruin, bound beneath the hill like a heartbeat buried alive. Her face was not a face, but a bloom of teeth and flowing hair and weeping mouths. Her arms, if they were arms, stretched for miles. Her body was water. Her memory was death, and the children were her pillows, her anchors, her lullabies. She sleeps beneath Whitmore Hill, Isolde whispered, and always has. She was never mine to control, but I learned I could soothe her, with song, with daughters. Eleanor's hands trembled. You sacrificed them. Isolde's gaze turned to fire. No, I protected them. Images flooded Eleanor's mind. Margaret standing at the well, whispering, Clara sleepwalking, smiling as she disappeared. Other girls, across centuries, vanishing without violence, without sound. Each one I took, Isolde said. I took to hide them, to keep her fed, but not awake, to giveth them silence, not suffering. It is not punishment. It is protection. Eleanor fell to her knees. Her voice cracked. Then take me instead. Isolde hovered above her. That is not how it works. Eleanor looked up, desperate. Why not? The water began to rise again. Isolde descended. Her hand brushed Eleanor's brow, cold, soft, salt-stained. Because the house remembers what was taken. The well is not just a prison. It is a ledger. And the water always demands balance. The visions came fast now. Eleanor saw her mother's face, Isolde Langford. Born Isolde Thorne, drowning in her own backyard, lungs full of mud and memory. She saw Henry weeping into the soil, begging for silence. She saw Clara and Margaret playing, sink or summon, laughing, unaware that each name he spoke fed something that had been hungry for generations. And she saw herself, not above the curse, but within it. One more link in a chain knotted by grief. One more daughter called back to the water. Isolde's single quote's voice broke the silence. If you want them back. A pause. You must take their place. Eleanor nodded. Tears ran down her face, only to disappear into the water below. Will they forget? Isolde looked toward the void. They will live, but the memory will remain, like a scar beneath the skin. Will I suffer? Isolde did not answer. She didn't need to. The answer had already been lived by generations. Eleanor stood, wiped her tears, then looked into the dark. Show me how. The chapel returned in a flash, stone and pews and teeth, and in the flooded reflection below the altar, Eleanor saw her sisters. Sleeping. Peaceful. Their faces turned to the side, like they were listening to a story just ending. She touched the surface, whispered their names, and the water still. One would rise. One would remain. Balance. The house had always been waiting for the trade. She rose from the black. Eleanor surfaced, with Clara's hand in hers, gasping, coughing, baptized in cold. The drowned chapel was gone, the vast underworld fading into mist behind her. Only the water remained, glowing faintly beneath the house like a lantern that could not be extinguished. Clara clung to her, eyes wide, shivering. Eleanor pulled her close. You're safe, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew they were not whole. Margaret was missing, not vanished, not consumed. Just unformed. The stone steps beneath them cracked as they climbed. Water seeped through every crevice. The house groaned. Something was ending. They emerged back into the cellar, sputtering, breathless. The walls were soaked. The air still carried the scent of lilies. And Margaret stood at the threshold of the spiral. Stairs, translucent. Half here, half elsewhere. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her hands trembled. Her eyes pleaded, but time ran backward around her like a tide refusing the shore. Eleanor stumbled toward her. Clara reached out, but Margaret had already begun to fade. Her outline flickered. Her breath grew shallow. Her feet no longer touched the floor. She was being forgotten, pulled back into the deep mother's dream. Eleanor looked at Clara, then at Margaret, and made her choice. No pleading, no ceremony. Just resolve. She turned to Clara and placed both hands on her shoulders. I need you to live. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears. No, don't leave me again. Not you. Eleanor smiled. It was soft, final. She'll take me instead. Margaret began to cry, but she was no longer solid enough for the tears to fall. Eleanor turned and stepped toward the stairs again. The spiral yawned open behind her. The descent would be different this time. Not into fear, not into madness, but into memory. Into offering. A song needed to be finished, as she would sing it. Above them, the house groaned louder. Would split. Glass shattered. Clara helped Margaret up the stairs. Eleanor watched them vanish into the dim orange glow offer light, and then Henry appeared, standing in the hallway, drenched in smoke and grief. He saw his eldest daughter at the edge of the spiral well. Their eyes met. No words passed, but Eleanor could see it in his face. He knew. His mouth opened to protest, to beg, but then closed again. He could not stop it, and maybe he no longer wanted to. His final act would be one of undoing, one of fire. The flames caught quickly, the drapes, the beams, the library. Smoke filled every corridor. Ash drifted like snow. Henry moved through the halls with a single candle touching it, to curtains, bookshelves, the stairs. The house that had kept his secrets, kept his daughters, kept his Lies would now burn with him. He lit the drawing room last, then sat in his chair, staring at the photograph of his wife, her name rewritten, her voice lost to the well. "I'm sorry," he whispered. And the ceiling fell in. Below, Eleanor began her descent. The stone trembled with every step, but she did not look back. Behind her, the spiral collapsed. One by one, every stone sealing the path above. She did not run. She did not cry. This was what had always been waiting. A ledger, finally balanced. A song, finally complete. She stepped once more into the flooded altar chamber. Isolde was waiting, but said nothing. She simply opened her arms. And Eleanor walked into them. Water rose. The walls groaned. Light vanished. And the last sound Eleanor heard was her sister's voice, whispering her name in the world above. Some say the Langford estate still smolders beneath Whitmore Hill. Even now, when it rains, the ground there feels warmer than it should, and that if you press your ear to the soil where the well once stood, you might still hear a song. Not sad. Not joyful. Just unfinished. Forever looping. Forever remembered. But the girls, Clara and Margaret Langford, were found days later by a constable alone, barefoot, wandering the edge of the orchard. They remembered almost nothing, only that their sister had gone home. Neither ever spoke of the well again, and the land finally went silent. Time forgets what it cannot hold. The year is 1893, 20 years since the fire. Since the Langfords vanished into ash and water and silence, a new family settles on Whitmore Hill. The house is gone, of course burnt to stone and memory, but foundations remain. Roots curl around old brick. The orchard still refuses to bloom, and the lilies come back every spring, even when no one plants them. They build a new house, simple and bright, paint the walls, hang laughter in the rafters. Let children race through the garden paths, oblivious to what lies beneath their feet. But the ground remembers. The land beneath is layered with names and secrets and songs like water under ice, always waiting to thaw. In the town's archive, only one photograph survives. Sepia-toned, faded at the corners. Eleanor Langford, standing alone before the garden well. She is not smiling. Her hands are clasped in front of her. Her eyes soft, but haunted, look not at the camera, but somewhere just behind it, somewhere far away. She is remembered as a tragedy, a daughter lost, a woman who vanished. But the truth is harder than that. More complicated, more buried. Locals say the land was cursed, that the well was a gate, that the house bled sorrow into its beams. But those who knew the old songs, those who still woke at night, when the rain turned cold, spoke differently. They said the curse was never the house. It was the forgetting. And sometimes the hill remembered. When it rained, and the cellar walls of the new home began to sweat. Water pooled in corners where no leak could be found, and in that water, a melody, so faint only children could hear it. A lullaby with no words, only hums, and longing. And sometimes, just sometimes, on the coldest nights, two girls were seen walking the ridge off the orchard, one with dark curls, one with ink-stained fingers. Always hand in hand, always looking back, not for escape, but for someone who never followed. Their sister, their anchor. Their offering. But the well, it remains sealed. Silent. Still. For now.